Hi everyone. With this particular video, I wanted to do something that wasn't related to Metroidvania and just all this stuff that I'm writing about more directly, and I wanted to talk about just a couple of things that I had noticed that were going on in terms of just the political situation on a more global scale, as opposed to just what's happening stateside specifically. A lot of people, of course, are talking about Elon Musk and the situation surrounding him doing the Nazi salute, so that's something that I wanted to respond to. Despite having already talked about it myself, there's someone here, Ozzy Man Reviews. There's someone that has been on YouTube for a long time, and they have a very big channel, and they're very successful. And as I become increasingly radical, I've noticed that this particular individual is obviously not. They're more like a white moderate, maybe slightly left-leaning, but not really. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. And I wanted to talk about that in regards to Ozzy Man Reviews and their response to fascism, but also another channel, Solomon Nelson, and his responding to someone whose name is Daniel Pekic, and how Daniel Pekic is basically a Nazi, and Solomon Nelson is like, yes, I will debate this person and tell them how dumb they are. And what ends up happening is Solomon Nelson and Daniel Pekic squash the beef, as the thumbnail says, and they have this giant ass 3.5 hour long, I don't know, bromance, kiss and make up session. It's very Canterbury Tales, okay, just you don't like the partner and the knight and the miller, and you guys obviously don't get along, but why don't you just give each other a hug and let it all out, and now you're magically friends. So I want to talk about that too, because it's part of the same problem. So I didn't really have a script going in for this. I'm just looking for something sort of conversational that I can watch and think about that isn't my book series and isn't video games and Metroidvania and that side of my research. So this is something that for me is a little bit fluffier. So we're going to do that. And we're going to start with the Ozzy Man reviews. It's a 10-minute video. And I'm going to try and get through it without pausing to comment too often. And we might not even watch the whole thing, but basically we're just going to be responding to him, responding to the salute, to basically comment why I think the Ozzy Man Reviews isn't really that left-leaning, but it's also something that I see in people like this Solomon individual, Solomon Nelson, but also other people that I've worked with or written about, because a lot of what I do, apart from video games historian type content and looking into speedrunners and various other things that I do besides that, from a historian standpoint, I also encounter a lot of people who are more middle of the road. And this middle of the road is a problem because you're dealing with people who are kind of doing a value judgment against Elon Musk, but at the same time they're like, I'm not really sure if that's a Nazi salute. It's kind of cringe, but also it might not be what it looks like. I don't want it. He doesn't actually out and out say it. He's not like, yep, you're a Nazi. Oh, well, he leaves like this weird, like, wiggle room for Musk, and he doesn't want to call him a Nazi or a fascist. He gives him this weird benefit of the doubt. And he also talks about selling his Tesla. So we'll watch that first, and then we'll talk about the same kind of white moderacy in regards to Solomon Nelson, who's debating Daniel Pekic, who's a Nazi. So that's the common ground between these two people. Basically, Solomon Nelson and Ozzy Man are basically debating Nazis, whereas in the case of Ozzy Man, it's more of a parasocial relationship, and in the case of Daniel Pekic and Solomon Nelson, it's more face-to-face, mano-y-mano. So we'll start with Ozzy Man, and then we'll go on to Solomon.
Hey, you going, you big bloody beautiful bastards, here's me face. Unless you've been living under a rock lately, most of you already know Elon Musk whipped out out a contentious salute gesture bodily arm movement at the US presidential inauguration.
Okay, so right off the bat, he can't just call it a Nazi salute. And I know that the word Nazi is from what I understand anyways, censored. So if the algorithm sort of picks up that you're saying it or writing it, what have you, it will affect the way that your channel is viewed, specifically the video itself. So this video, since January 28th, has garnered over 250,000 views, and by and large probably because he didn't say the Nazi salute, though he could have said a Roman salute, but he doesn't even do that. Again, it's according to the profit motive and algorithm and visibility and stuff like that. He's basically doing what Nazis want him to do, which is to say, you know what, that's not a Nazi salute, that's not even a Roman salute, that's just a weird arm gesture hand thingy.
Last week. Let's look at it again. Let's do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so he did that twice. And look, most of you have probably made up your minds in regard to how you see the salute gesture, whether you think it was his heart going out to Republican American voters and the people in the room specifically.
But those things aren't like mutually exclusive is the thing. Is he's appealing to a specific base of people. It's a call to violence. So to act like, oh, well, he's just doing this, that's a form of obfuscation. You're basically saying, oh, well, he's just saying hi. He's literally just waving to his friends. Well, that can be true, but also the fact that he's signaling them to attack. Those aren't mutually exclusive. So if you're trying to present it like, oh, well, it could just be this, you're making their argument for them.
My heart goes out to you.
And these are all super white, just Trumper American types. These are all, well, Nazis. Basically, there's no other way to say it. And a lot of people are like, oh, there's no way that this could be that. There's no way that we could be looking at that. But I mean, that's how Nazis operate. They're not just going to keep using the same Hugo Boss uniforms with the red armbands and the swastika with the red, white, and the black. You know, the red, white, and blue works just as well.
You. It is thanks to you.
Or you think it was a signal and a show of support for white supremacy, white power, and neo-Nazis.
And I like how he's presenting it, like it's somehow up to debate. Like, oh, well, if you think it's this or you think it's that. And he's not really saying, you know what, I think he's a Nazi. He never says that. He leaves that weird sort of debate element into it, while at the same time kind of like being like, hey, look, here's this comparison. And he doesn't want to just say it. And that's a lack of solidarity on his part, which again, he's giving them wiggle room so that they can, the fascist elements that he's talking about can wiggle their way out of it. And they're already facing tons of scrutiny and backlash and stuff like that. But at the same time, someone like him isn't really standing and making a firm statement, which needs to be done in times like this.
Hey, Vineyard!
And again, he seems to understand exactly what it is and is saying it without saying it, but it'd be real nice if he said it.
I reckon we can for certain say that it was belligerent.
Yep.
There was physical exertion due to the rapid movement. And there was conviction in it. His body language was not limp. The second one was a little limpy and floppy, but that first salute gesture, come on, it fucking burst out of the gates like bloody Farlap or Seabiscuit.
You and me, let's go, boy, let's go! Ah! Ah!
That
And again, like, I get what he's doing. He's kind of like, on one hand, he's making light of it and making fun of it a little bit. But again, it's, instead of just out and out saying it, like, look, he's a Nazi, he's kind of dancing around it a little bit. And there's a bit of humor involved and stuff like that. But he's also doing, you know, what a Nazi might do. And he's like, well, yeah, because a Nazi could do the same exact fucking thing and be like, oh, yeah, it kind of looks like what that guy did in American History X, but it's, you might think this or you might think that. Like, he's basically going to bat for fascism by not challenging it nearly enough.
Gesture was busting to get out and to fly loose. Those are the elements we can have certainty with.
And I like how he says, oh, well, we can be certain about this or that, even though he leaves the part of the video where he says, thanks to you, the future of civilization is secured. Like, again, Musk didn't just do the salute. He also said words, but he doesn't talk about that. He just talks about the salute, and he makes it sound more ambiguous than it actually is, which is stupid.
Because that's just...
And it's stupid, I should add, because it's something that will not affect him to nearly the same degree. And it's unfortunate, but also not that surprising, that someone like him, I don't really know him, like I don't follow him very closely, but just giving a look at him, like I've seen him talk about indigenous struggles before, to a certain degree, and saying, look, like slavery is bad, that kind of thing. But then he suddenly turns around and does something like this, where he's like, actually, it's like, well, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, this is what we can be certain about. It could be this or it could be that, so we're not really certain about anything. And I'm not going to talk about the words that came out of his mouth. So again, he's muddying the waters for no particular reason. And I don't know if he thinks he's being funny, but it's kind of telling, given that he has to explain away his own relationship in regards to having bought a car from Tesla, despite the fact that a lot of the things about Musk being a Nazi have been common knowledge for a long time. Like, we're talking like 20 years at least, and it's not something that is like you can obviously turn a blind eye to, because it's not going to affect you, you're not going to look into it. But at the same time, right now, he's going to bat for a man who, all of these problems, like in regards to Tesla and the racial segregation happening at those factories, and again, Trump is a Nazi, and a lot of his Nazi stuff didn't just happen with this salute. And when the that's like the obvious mask off moment, and even now, he's still kind of like, oh, well, it could be this or it could be that. That's awfully telling about Ozzy Man reviews. He's doing the white moderate thing. He's debating literally with himself about this. It's very parasocial.
Our eyes looking at someone's body. That's the fact there. But critically analysing it beyond that, sure, that can get more complex. And
it's actually quite simple. Musk is a member of the owner class, and he's appealing to fascist sentiments to basically aspire people on that particular political spectrum to marshal around him. He is marshaling the troops of a particular political group to do his bidding. That's the point of it. It's literally a rally. That's what those are designed for historically, and that's what they're appealing to, the same way that the Nazis did in Germany, and the same way that American presidents have. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Like, it's the same exact thing. Presidents are designed to do that, but corporate executives, the owner class, Musk is the world's richest man in terms of how wealth is defined under capital, and it gets that can get complicated just in terms of, well, what is ownership? How does that function in terms of status? But we're talking about like dialectical material devices at that point. But in terms of complexity, in terms of owners versus workers, that's an incredibly simple issue. And a dog whistle, despite how they want you to think that it's complicated, is actually, again, quite simple. It's a signal to his voter base where he's going mask off, and you're saying it's complicated, the same way that a Zionist might say that it's complicated in the Middle East, when really it's not, because there's someone with a lot of power, and there's someone with not a lot of power. And someone like Elon Musk, who has a lot of power, is basically marshaling people under him to attack those with not a lot of power. That's what he's going to do. That's not complicated. It's actually quite simple. And if you say that it's complicated, you're just complicating the issue.
It's been a little It's been a little complex for old Ozzy, man, because don't laugh at me. I bought a Tesla Model 3 back in 2020.
Okay, so you're just experiencing buyer's remorse because you bought a car from an actual Nazi.
And it was a risky purchase in Perth, Western Australia 5 years ago. There were not many of them on the roads. One bloke would pick you up and just tell you that Teslas are cool, and that was it. And then you'd go collect it from a warehouse in the middle of buttfuck nowhere. So that was the process. It was the first car I ever bought brand new.
Okay, so it was literally a status symbol for you. You bought it to be like, hey, I got a new car, and not only that, I got a Tesla. And my evil uncle, who up until recently anyways liked Elon Musk, another white liberal who would apologize for that kind of horseshit, got a Tesla because he thought, hey, this is a really cool car. And isn't it weird that just all these weird canonical white nerds who are moderate to right, more aggressively right-leaning, as opposed to like centrist or moderate Republican to aggressively Republican, to just like mask off white supremacists. Though again, it's a gradient, and they all include that same kind of white supremacy, even moderate white supremacy, something like Ozzy Man reviews. He's still a white guy from wherever the fuck in Australia, and saying that it's complicated when it comes to something as obvious as a Nazi salute is, guess what? A form of white supremacy where you're basically gaslighting your audience while explaining why I bought a Tesla. Now, he's kind of the butt of his own joke, and he didn't have to say that, but he's also kind of getting out in front of and doing damage control regarding images on his Instagram, where people are probably going to point out that, hey, you have a Tesla, after Elon Musk did the Nazi salute. So this is as much about protecting his own image as it is about critiquing Elon Musk, because he's actually defending Elon Musk to a certain extent and saying, well, it's complicated. No, it's not complicated, Ozzy Man. You are being a white moderate, which is a defender of Nazis in this instant, an open and expressed Nazi at this point. So good job.
I was 34. My previous cars were a Mitsubishi Red 1981 Sigma. That was great. A Holden Gemini, a used Toyota Corolla. That blew a head gasket within a month. What a fucking stitch up. A Ford Falcon. I bought that off Cindy, who worked at my dad's hardware store. That had about 400 kms on the odometer. More when I...
Okay, so you're the white middle class guy who worked for your dad and his small business. Okay, so that's your particular class character, so it's not really surprising, especially now that you have a channel of 6.3 million subscribers on YouTube, that you might do something like this. But it says a lot more about you than you might think. And honestly, just your sexist comments about women and making this fluff kind of content in the middle of a genocide. I mean, when's the last time that you did a video about Palestine, for instance? I don't think you've ever talked about Palestine in any meaningful sense. And I'm sure that you might say that you're against genocide, but you have a very large channel and you spend most of the time making slop content, basically, and there's nothing wrong with that up to a certain point. I like destination fucked as much as anyone, but it doesn't change the fact that I think that your content is mildly offensive sometimes. And right now it's incredibly offensive that you're doing this. I mean, like, oh, well, it's complicated. No, it's not complicated, dude.
I got rid of it. And a Honda Accord Euro luxury. Those were the cars before I became a Tesla wanker. Mitsubishi Sigma was the best.
So basically he's describing how he became increasingly gentrified.
I'll debate that till the end. But yeah, look, I stood by it. No tailpipe emissions. I liked that. I like the sustainability messaging. I like testing the battery technology over petrol. It's worth having a crack.
Not only that, though, where does the electricity for your battery come from? You still have to generate power like that. Now, in Australia, I imagine the infrastructure and the way that they generate electricity is perhaps different than in the United States, where an over-reliance on fossil fuels, the electricity here isn't generated in clean ways. So the idea of clean energy and a reliance on petroleum and moving away from that around the world is a work in progress. Certain countries are ahead of the curve. Other countries are seriously behind. I can't say for Australia. But again, it's like he's basically saying like, okay, I bought this to feel better about the environment. But you go and buy a Nazi vehicle, basically the Volkswagen of the 21st century, so that you can combat pollution by enriching a billionaire, that's not actually going to solve anything.
I don't think these things are that progressive or pompous or exclusive
They're not.
to wealthy people. I mean, West Aussies
You're relatively wealthy.
drop like north of 100 grand on our utes and our four-wheel drives here in a heartbeat. So 50 to 60 grand AUD, I thought it was good value for the...
Yeah, I'm sure that you thought it was a good purchase and that you could justify it. But again, you seem to care more about the price tag and the status symbol and virtue signaling in a way like, don't worry, guys, I'm doing all of these things. Look at it. But you could have bought it from like anyone. You know, obviously at the point that you bought the car in 2020, in the middle of COVID, I can't say, like, obviously the competition now exists where it didn't necessarily before. But again, just because Henry Ford sold the Model T doesn't mean you had to support him and he was a fucking Nazi. So if you did that back in the day, you're still, again, it's monopolized, but you're still supporting a Nazi and you're stepping away from that and you're voting with your wallet, and which is a very white moderate approach to things. But again, like, the language and the way that you're explaining it has as much to do with how you feel about yourself as a person in a way that seems to scream, I'm a white moderate, which is a problem.
The Model 3 standard range, no add-ons, just the basics. And it was, you can tell I'm hurting a little bit. It was a fantastic car. And
oh, darn. It's such a shame that the fact that Elon Musk is a Nazi and you just had no idea about any of that until just this moment shows kind of how blind you are. And I think to a certain extent that's probably willful.
And it comes from a company that has lots of people and engineers working.
So you talk again about, oh, it has lots of scientists. Well, again, what about the human rights abuses? These have been going on for a while, since at least 2020. Like, exposés on Elon Musk are something that have been around and you just chose to ignore. Like, you obviously spent a lot of time researching the car in terms of how it might benefit you and how it might make you look like a good person for making some kind of, inadequate stance in regards to the environment. It's not good activism. If you're buying a car that still uses electricity in a way that is going to require the burning of fossil fuels at factories, then you're not really solving anything. You also have to raise awareness, and what you're doing is basically listing off a series of reasons why, okay, this is why I bought the car, and this is why I thought it would make me look cool, and oh gosh, Elon Musk, well, it's complicated, he might not be a Nazi. It's like, what are you talking about?
Working for it. It's not all Elon. I am aware of that. I'm not a complete dickhead. I'm a little dickhead, but
yes, you are.
Not a big one.
You kind of are, actually. You're like, oh no, I'm not an asshole. Yeah, yes, you are. Like, dude, like, this is like a weird, like, humble brag, sorry, not sorry kind of thing. And, like, it's like, I don't know, some serious white moderate copium from a guy who he could just be like, look, he doesn't want to just out and out say, like, look, I bought the car and I didn't care. He has to try and explain it in all these ways that, I don't know, it just didn't sound very convincing. Maybe that's just me. Maybe that's because I'm obviously not his target audience, which is white cishet men in their 30s and 40s.
I couldn't shake the feeling driving in it for the last week that it's...
For the last week. Just bear in mind, for the last week, up until this moment, he was fine with it. But the last week, this is the breaking point. It took Elon Musk doing the Nazi salute at the presidential rally for him to actually say enough is enough.
It's not fun anymore. It's soured. The feeling has soured.
So basically, you don't want to affiliate with someone who's an open white supremacist at this point. He's been a white supremacist for a long time, and a billionaire, and just an all-around piece of shit. But now enough is enough, and you don't want to be affiliated with him. It's a very white moderate thing to do.
And in my humble opinion, it's because I think Elon Musk's salute gesture was dodgy as fuck.
Dodgy as fuck?
Say he didn't know what he was doing, it is a cop-out. To say...
Okay, yeah.
It was a neurodivergent quirk, that might just be throwing neurodivergent people under the bus, to be honest.
Yes, but also call it what it is.
To say he was trolling and being an edgelord, you're getting triggered. Why are you so easily triggered? That just deflects too much responsibility on
I agree.
real life damage that can come from this.
Can come, does come. It's not like well, it could happen. It's already happening.
Real life damage such as an escalation in bigoted, prejudiced, outright racist behaviour.
Yep.
I mean, the other day there was like 16 self-confessed neo-Nazis out on the street in Adelaide. I get
You also have to keep in mind, though, that it's easier to attack people who are like out and out Nazis like this, but the flag that they're waving, you know, the is that the Australian flag, sorry, Freudian slip. I'm queer, I can say fag. But in terms of the Australian flag, what I presume is what they're waving. Sue me, I'm not from Australia, but in any event, you also have to keep in mind that the powers that be rely on people like this to make noise. These are the rabid dogs, the dogs on leads. They are members of a vigilante form of stochastic terrorism, and they make some noise, and they cause a lot of problems. And in the chaos, fascists try and seize more and more formal power, and they keep taking and taking under a state of crisis, a state of emergency. And white moderates, elected or not, will basically say, oh, well, you know, this is obviously a problem. But this is just when they're going mask off. You know, this is what they mean by saying woke, is when you're aware of them before the mask comes off. And he's acting like, oh, well, fascists only exist when they remove their mask, is basically what Ozzy Man Reviews is saying. And that's stupid.
Yes, they felt emboldened.
Do you accept that it's a neo-Nazi group?
Yes,
Right, so you've joined a neo-Nazi group.
correct, proudly.
Why is that?
Because I'm a neo-Nazi, obviously.
Why even risk egging them on? Technically,
Why even risk egging them on? Well, like they don't need an excuse. They're going to just do it. So he's acting like don't engage with them. And it's like, no, you need to engage with them. You need to challenge them. You need to out them and shame them every single waking moment instead of being like, oh, he did a dodgy arm gesture. Ha ha, it's like Malcolm, not Malcolm X, American History X. It's like, no, you need to be much more aggressive about this than you're being.
we don't know if Elon is a neo-Nazi. He's not outright saying
He doesn't have to. It's called dog whistling.
it, but to validate, enable, or pander to the values and ideologies of white power and white supremacy, which I do think he was doing with that salute
Good, yes.
gesture twice, it's enough for me to go,
Yeah, okay. But he's been doing this since for fucking ever. Like, his dad owned an emerald mine in Africa. Like, he's from South Africa. Like, his mother's side are actually Nazis. Like, it's not like this is like some new thing. Like, he's just coming out of the closet about it. He's going mask off.
yeah, nah, you're cooked. You're cooked, mate. I
Okay, points. You know, at least you can say that.
don't want this in my general proximity at
But you can't just reject it and say, well, I don't want this. Okay, no, you need to face it and attack it. Not just to you know, turn your nose up at it and be like, oh, well, like his expression right here kind of says it all. It's like, no, you have to acknowledge it in a way that is, you have to reject it and attack it in a very anti-fascist kind of way, which is not something that he's used to doing because he views this as a write-off. Like he lost his precious Tesla, as opposed to, no, he's a Nazi, fuck him.
all. So the Tesla,
You know, it took him 5 minutes and he can't even say that.
I advertised it, I unpacked it, and I said goodbye to it. And
I guess, okay, so he sold the Tesla, and how does he know, what if a neo-Nazi buys it, you know?
I gave it my own blunt gesture. That means piss.
Again, though, it's like, it's a symbolic gesture, sure, but you're still making money off it. You're recouping your losses, and it's like, okay, fair enough, you gotta do what you gotta do, I guess. But it's like, you know, it's like, no, it's like, call a spade, dude. Musk is a Nazi. If you do a Nazi salute and you're friends with Nazis, then you're a Nazi. That's how that works.
Piss off. I hope it can't be misconstrued. I did post it in my IG stories and on Reddit, and that's been a bit hectic. It's fine if it looks cringe. I don't mind.
Why would it look cringe? Like, you're standing up against Nazis. Who cares?
got 30k back, and I'm no
Okay, so you got your money back, basically, and all right. Good for you.
longer going to be spending money on future services because there's a bunch of stuff that's out of warranty after 5 years. I won't be spending a monthly fee on the internet connectivity, the premium connectivity. It just makes Spotify work better, basically. I won't be spending any money with Tesla on that stuff. Look.
Okay, that's good. The whole voting with your wallet thing, that's, again, it's a very white, moderate, middle-class approach to things. But you have to bear in mind that this isn't a zero-sum game. Like, they don't gain power just through you spending money on them. That's a middle-class myth. They gain money by exploiting people and stealing from them. So any money that you don't spend on them is kind of a fruitless gesture unto itself. That's what it's not a zero-sum game. So they can keep doing what they're doing. You could never spend another dollar on them, and they could still be, polluting the planet and monopolizing businesses and doing various other harmful things at their factories. And you doing what you're doing isn't going to stop that insofar as you've explained what you've done, which is why you have to be more vocal. You have to take risks. You can't just be like, okay, well, fuck this car. By the way, I didn't really... What sacrifices are you making? You're basically explaining, okay, well, I sold the car and I made some money and then I flicked it off and I get all these sort of brownie points and I get to look kind of cool, but also I'm kind of walking around the idea that Elon Musk is a Nazi. Like, you're still wrestling with that? Like, and that's like the first thing that you need to reconcile with.
People do it when they think a brand goes too woke. I'm going to...
Too woke? And again, that's a dog whistle right there. That's you appealing and using language that is something that, like, what Musk and his fans would use. Woke is effectively a way of taking something that was originally used by African Americans, people of color in the 1920s and 30s, to talk about being woke and aware of things that would cost marginalized people their lives. Whereas you're using it more like in the Gamergate kind of way, which is, again, kind of telling because it's a white supremacist approach to things. And even if you're not aware of it, if you're just kind of bouldering through things Indiana Jones style, it's still not a good look, dude.
Do it when I think a brand goes too neo-Nazi.
Yeah, that's too neo-Nazi. But too neo-Nazi, so a little neo-Nazi is okay. Like, I get the point that you're saying. But also, I see what you're doing, which is saying, oh, well, a little bit is fine. If Elon Musk is just slightly a Nazi. But now I actually have to say something because God damn it, Elon, you went mask off with it. So now I have to, who could have thought? So he's acting like he's doing something good here when he's basically self-reporting and saying, by the way, I covered this up until now, and now I can't ignore it, so I have to pick a side, finally, at the crossing of the Rubicon? Like, what? That's nothing.
That's all it is. And I think maybe, and the reason why I'm now making a video on it is because I think Tesla owners might be the only path to a repercussion for him. Current Tesla owners might be the only ones that can yield a consequence for him.
Oh, okay. So it's the white savior argument. You, the middle class car owner, are the one who can affect him in a way that he'll notice and care about. And I will say that, Tesla is a stock that is tied to a company, but also Tesla is a dying company and they have the presidency now. And that's not to say that Tusk isn't immune to these kinds of things, but ultimately this is in the hand of shareholders. And people such as yourself grossly overestimate the effect that you're basically taking something that you bought whose value diminishes incredibly, and you're putting stock in it and saying, oh, this is such an important thing. And it clearly is to you because you spent half the video talking about how much your car matters to you and why you regret buying it and how you're trying to make yourself feel better by finally making a stand about someone who's been a white supremacist for a long time. And no, it's like you need to, this is not good praxis. This is just you apologizing for your own behaviors and trying to make yourself sound like you're the only one who can do something. That's white savior behavior, which is also not good praxis.
Because I don't really see it happening from Tesla as a company. They seem to be quite silent on
Yes, that's, yeah, sure.
the whole thing. There was the projection on the Berlin factory.
Yeah, that's, well, they can ignore it because they're a fascist factory. You know, it's the Henry Ford problem. He's a fascist car manufacturer in the 2020s as opposed to the 1920s. It's just history repeating itself. It's this historical materialism. Yeah, they can afford to ignore it. And then they'll just pack up shop and leave when things get too hot. That's how fascists work. Or they just go down with the ship historically, but
it just seems like it's not phasing them. They gave Elon the $50 billion bonus last year. The shareholders or the board approved all of that.
well, from what I understand, there are certain stipulations in effect as far as that goes, and the stock has to have a certain amount of value, and he can't trade certain things, and so on and so forth. But yeah, no, he's literally the owner of the company. Of course they did. He's the owner class, and they're beholden to him. Like, if he owns a certain percentage, then they have to do what he says.
And his gesture kind of had that vibe to it, that aura, like, I'm untouchable. Who's
Yeah,
your daddy? I'm going to do this on the world stage.
yeah.
There'll be no consequence, and I know it. So, I don't know. It might be a tiny little protest, and
Yeah,
you can say it's useless. That's fine.
yeah.
And you can say, Ozzy, man, why are you dying on this hill?
See, I like how he's basically saying, he's kind of admitting that, okay, this is kind of dumb. And you're not dying on this hill. You're doing just fine. And unless, like, your channel gets taken down or something extreme like that, it is a gesture, like, you're not dying on any kind of hill. You're not doing some Jesus Christ maneuver. You're not giving away all of your stuff. You're not making some kind of stand that's going to affect you in any demonstrable way. You sold your car and recouped your losses because you got it for what, $50,000, and then you made 30 grand off it. So ultimately you got a lot of use out of it, and including status for how, 5 years, and you only just sold it a couple days ago, a week ago, if that. And so you're using it to enrich yourself, and you made 30 grand back. So no, it's not, you're not dying on any kind of hill. Again, it's this white savior thing where you think that you're more rebellious than you actually are. God.
Why are you dying on the hill of the world's richest bloke? I don't know. I mean, let me die
You're not. You're barely punching up at this point.
on it. Many more of us might die on it in future.
Yes, that you and I are in 100% agreement as far as that goes. Though the people who are going to be dying first are not you. I can guarantee you that.
I'm just getting ahead of it. Yeah, it's the Aussie way. We just run into conflict fast. And
yes, you run into conflict, even though it took you 5 years after owning the car to finally put your foot down when Elon Musk did the Nazi salute. So basically, he can lead you around by the nose because you're so blind to these things, they only react when it's staring you in the fucking face.
And immediately. So let me do it. And
like, I don't want to, like, I wish I could feel more positive about this kind of thing. But again, this is a very self-serving kind of thing. Like, oh, well, look at me. This is what I'm doing. And, oh, I'm taking such a great risk, even though I just sold my car and made all this money off it. And I could basically save face is what he's doing. And it's like, maybe if you were actually doing something that I saw as a risk, then I might actually feel a little bit more, I don't know, empathetic. But at the moment, you're basically doing what a lot of, it's maybe a step above like American liberals, because you're not punching down aggressively at marginalized groups, which is the bare minimum, but you're not doing that. So kudos. But you're also doing a lot of like brand salvaging here. And you're kind of acknowledging it in a very blokey, kind of straight, Ozzy sort of way, and that's always kind of been your style. So, points for consistency. But also, I'm just like, come on, really, dude? It's been just 5 years, not including the Gamergate stuff and all of that. And, so 10 years ago, but even just in the past, 5 years now, you're telling me that you just realized that Elon Musk was too neo-Nazi for you? Like, really?
Yeah, that's the story behind that. Current Tesla owners might cause a repercussion, but probably not. Anyway, I don't think he...
So you don't even think it's going to do anything. So why don't you actually do something that you think, put some thought into it? It's like, I appreciate the 10-minute video about this, but really, this is the kind of content that you should be doing all the time. And you should be more active on a regular basis instead of just, using this to make money.
He was doing it just to trigger leftist, libtard, woke people. Like
leftist, libtard, woke people. And I get it, you're using the language that they would use to attack us. Sure. But are you saying that you don't belong to that group?
Okay. It felt like there was more to it.
Well, I mean, there's, yeah, it's you're recognizing a threat that could potentially affect you, and that's important. But also, it's like, well, no, welcome to what we experience every day.
And yeah, an example of someone just being an edgelord or trolling with the gesture was PewDiePie back in
Really? You're going to apologize for PewDiePie?
2017. Remember, he did it in a video and it caused the whole it contributed to the demonetization, the adpocalypse we called it, across YouTube where
oh no, it actually affected you. So if PewDiePie does it and it affects you, then it's the adpocalypse and it's a bad thing. But if Elon Musk does it and it doesn't affect you, then you can grandstand and get on your soapbox and do the virtue signaling thing. What? It's like PewDiePie's a Nazi. Because if you do a Nazi salute, unironically, guess what you are? You're a Nazi. It's called dog whistling. And you're defending him, but you're also kind of defending Musk. While also saying, oh, okay, I'm doing this. It might not make a difference, and he might have done this, and he might not have done this. But whatever, I'm going to do it anyways to make myself look good. But also, I'm going to defend PewDiePie in the same video. God, this is a mess.
Creators were demonetized, and advertisers were like, we don't care about the context. We don't want ads playing in front.
It doesn't matter. Like, okay, the only example I could think of maybe is if, like, I don't know, you're doing like a historical drama or you're reenacting it and it's like very obviously this is a reenactment, something like that, sure. Or if you're literally making fun of Nazis and be like, I'm making fun of Nazis, and then you do the salute, something like that, okay. But you're like, no, it's all about the context. And also PewDiePie, the person who says the N-word and is just racist, and you're apologizing for him the same way that you're apologizing for Elon and yourself.
Front of that gesture. And PewDiePie, his response, it was up and down, but it was the context of someone who did it to be edgy. He did
it to be edgy. No, because then he can just say, don't worry, guys, just take my word for it. I was doing it to be edgy. That's dog whistling. It's obscurantism. It's Darvo. Oh, well, I'm the victim here. I was just doing it to be edgy. I didn't mean it. Any Nazi can do that. Okay, until suddenly there's no backlash. And what do you think they're going to say then? Do you think they'll be like, no, I was just being edgy? They're doing that to protect themselves. That's a standard Nazi tactic. And you're defending them.
The conscience. He was saying, I know it's hurtful. I know the gesture can cause pain. That was the context of someone who did it.
Then why did you do it?
To be satirical, and it got out.
It's satirical and it got out of hand, even though he did something deliberately that's a hate symbol. And it just got out of hand. Again, you're playing devil's advocate for some really shitty people.
Out of hand? I don't see that with Elon.
So what's the difference?
And if we are talking a lot about context, the my heart goes out to you gesture after the first salute is just cherry picking context.
It's not cherry picking. He's saying, my heart goes out to you. He's pledging to his base and to the people who defend civilization. It's an oath. It's the 14 points. It's literally white supremacy. And you're saying, oh no, and you're gaslighting us about this? about something that's not going to affect you nearly as immediately as it will someone like me, let alone people who are more marginalized than myself, a trans person of color, a Muslim, American, someone like that. Immigrants.
Because the context actually is he's in a political arena, in front of a live audience, in front of a politically charged audience. Doing that gesture in that context is nuts within itself.
Oh, okay. No, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yes. It sucks that, it has to be that obvious for you because, like with PewDiePie, oh, well, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt because he's a gamer. Guess what? Gamers can be Nazis too. So if you're a gamer, you can enjoy anonymity, whereas someone like Elon Musk should know better. And it's like, no, they both should know better. And Musk is relying on people like PewDiePie to have spread these things so that he feels comfortable enough doing it on a larger stage. That's what PewDiePie was doing. They're testing the waters. That's the whole point of dog whistles.
And he's talking about America being great and being the first with Mars and planting flags. He's got the stars and the flag and saluting that. That broader context overshadows those 6 words, my heart goes out to you. All of that adds up to a nationalistic extreme context with
palingenetic ultranationalism. Fascism.
The gesture thrown in there as well.
It's not just thrown in there. It's not just like a candle on a cake. Like it's a part of how they operate more basically.
So that's my opinion, and that's why I've gotten rid of the Tesla Model 3. And
okay, cool. I guess spend all this time explaining how you did it in a way that benefits you, but what are you going to do to help other people?
And roast me all you like. That's fine. I'm a big boy. I can handle it.
Yeah, you're white, middle class. You'll be fine.
Yeah, but I don't know. Let me know in the comments what car you reckon I should buy. Maybe a Lambo. Maybe Supercar Blondie could send me a Lambo. We did that video together some years ago. When Lambo? Come on. Or a Mitsubishi Sigma, if anyone's got one of those in mint condition.
Okay, so you haven't learned a goddamn thing.
Approaching 40 years old and a midlife crisis, I might be interested in a Mitsi Sigma for old.
Why? So you go on and basically just splurge? Like, oh yeah, you're suffering so hard. Okay, well anyways, I think you get the point. But this is the white moderacy that I'm talking about. Now in his case, in Ozzy Man Review's case, he is having a parasocial debate with his audience and also Elon Musk basically, and talking to himself about this kind of thing, and basically explaining why he's not apologizing for Nazis, but then also doing it with PewDiePie and Musk, to be completely frank. So something like this, and this kind of debate method is something that he does parasocially, whereas our next person, Solomon Nelson, is doing it with Daniel Pekic. And there are certain things, like Solomon Nelson is someone who came on my radar because they respond to a particular fitness channel. Dr. Mike is the name of the guy who does it, and it's a particular fitness channel, and I can't remember the name of the channel. He'll probably say what it is, but it's like he is someone who has critiqued this Dr. Mike person, and it's basically the natty athletes versus the unnatural athletes, and there's no love lost between them. But something I've noticed about him and the way that he talks about his audience and about physical fitness and various other things that come up in this video, and just other videos as well, is there's kind of a white moderate approach to the way that he goes over things too. And like one red flag that I noticed immediately with Solomon Nelson is he would say the word, excuse me for saying this, obese, which is a slur that's used by doctors against fat people. And so I've worked with fat models in the past and fat liberation and the treatment of fat people in ways that are basically persecuted and mistreated, and it's a form of bigotry that's used by the medical industry. Like, fat is, depending on the context, acceptable. Like, obviously if you call someone fat as an insult, then it's insulting. whereas obese is literally a medical slur in the industry that's used to dehumanize a particular group of people who aren't always unhealthy. Like BMI is bullshit by and large. And that doesn't mean that you can't have too much body weight, but like people who get to such a degree that it's medically unhealthy, and that includes people who are muscular or not. But the idea of certain body types like mesomorph or ectomorph or endomorph, those are incredibly stigmatic and loaded terms, and they're not really that scientific. And for the record, BMI isn't scientific. It can be incorporated into a scientific model, but it doesn't change the fact that that's bigoted. So that's something I noticed about Solomon Nelson even before watching any of this. It's just like, because I've worked with fat models before and fat liberation and liberation from these particular modes of exploitation where doctors will treat you differently if you are of a certain body weight or a certain body type, even if you're not like physically unhealthy, because fat phobia is a thing. And blood work is what matters, but that doesn't have to do with your physical appearance. But physical appearance is something that Solomon Nelson cares about in a white supremacist way, because he's all about that Eugene Sandow kind of look. And Eugene Sandow was someone who existed before the athletic industry as we know of it today, and that being fueled by the drug epidemics that came after the silver age of bodylifting as opposed to the bronze age. And before, I don't know, is it the stone age before that? I don't know. But basically the bronze era lifters from like Eugene Sandow or thereabouts were completely natural. And then in the silver era, you had guys like, what's his name? I think Sergio Olivia was at a point where he was basically between the silver and the golden era, and he was sort of Arnold Schwarzenegger's challenge, and Arnold Schwarzenegger was a champion in the 1970s, where Sergio Olivia was someone who was a Mr. Olympia out of the 1960s. So I want to say that he was kind of in the silver era. Steve Reeves was another person, and there's various other champions like that whose bodies, they were basically on just starting to experiment healthily with anabolic, steroids, growth hormones, those kinds of things, but a lot of things like tren and diuretics and various other drugs. I forget exactly which ones are which, but didn't really exist yet. And the epidemic after the 70s into the 1980s and beyond, where a lot of people who are on steroids don't even compete professionally. And it's this bigorexia kind of thing, which is a word that came into existence before I was born, like in Illustrated Mechanics in like 1985, I think was when that word came into popular usage through the publication in a magazine. So this is not a new problem, but the idea of you have these guys who are kind of regressing towards like, oh yeah, Eugene Sandow and natural athletes, and physical fitness is fine, but it's also tied to particular Western values that have a white supremacist component. And that is showing through Solomon Nelson and his approach to things. Well, he'll talk about obviously punching up against particular people, but he'll also say the word obese a lot. And that is, he's doing it unironically, and he thinks that it's this perfectly fine word, but no, it's incredibly bigoted, and it's a problematic word all by itself. But that's just context before getting into this video. And we already watched the Ozzy Man Views things where he's kind of having a parasocial debate with himself, his audience, and with Elon Musk about why he doesn't approve of him anymore. And he's got a finger wag and debate that Nazi. He's not even talking to him and voting with his wallet and stuff. And facts and logic, that kind of thing. The same exact thing happens here with Daniel Pekic. And I wanted to give a little bit of context about Solomon Nelson because he is someone who is kind of bigoted himself. And you might not notice it at first because he'll take something that seems good on its face, like, okay, say no to drugs, that kind of thing, in terms of drug abuse and getting away from an unhealthy fitness image, which is totally fine, even though the image that they have of that statuesque white male body and certain people associated with it, which will come up in this video, that's a problem too, that he doesn't even begin to critique because he thinks that he's just right. And he's so right, in fact, that he feels comfortable debating Nazis as a white, cishet man. They're just defending the world as it exists through the status quo that he represents and the kind of arguments that he makes. And, he's a very erudite, sounding kind of dude and intellectual, and I like how his videos are structured, because I used to make very similar kinds of videos, and I would structure my essays. I still do that with my books and things like that, but just the approach to things in terms of how I go about the content is what I'm getting at, and the context, and the fact that you have someone who's basically a white liberal, a white moderate, who is debating a Nazi who is kind of bigoted himself, despite the fact that, anyone could sort of critique members of the same industry. They're basically jousting and saying, and he'll defend basically white men from drug use, but then he'll say the word obese and mean it, and talk about BMI and mean it, and a lot of other things that come up that only really show themselves when he's debating this Nazi dude. And the reason I even wanted to talk about this at all was because he and Daniel Pekic kiss and make up, and beef squashed. And actually, in regards to that, he says, real quick here, Pekic was basically making Nazi arguments, and you're debating him? That's kind of white moderate facts and logic shit, isn't it? And he says, I'm not sure how to answer your questions, but I think this conversation with Daniel was a productive exercise. Daniel took back a great number of his old claims that you might have found distasteful. And it's like, okay, so if a Nazi's like, we are the master race, and then they're like, actually, don't do that. And they're like, oh, okay, I took it back. That's dog whistling, just because someone dials it back. And what he's doing is he's patting himself on the back and saying, well, I debated the Nazi and I told him that he was wrong. And now I'm going to use his video to promote how right I am. Like, no, you can't just give him a slap on the wrist and call it good, dude. You have to, it's not, I don't find it just distasteful. It's against my very existence. Okay. So we're probably not going to watch this video in particular, which is where this comment is responding, which I made this comment in his comment section. Oh my God, this is a long video. Yeah, Pekic was basically making, so I make this comment, he responds to it, and there are all these people, and they're like, only a few minutes in, and can already tell this is another banger, big fan of influencers showing personal growth and owning mistakes. And it's like, we're not just talking about like, oh, well, you said this, and it's like, oh, you're right. Now, you know what, I could sit through the whole video and be like, yeah, but how easy is it for someone to say a deeply held belief and for him to be like, in bad faith is what I mean, be like, you know what, you're right. Like, I don't trust someone like this enough to just give them the benefit of the doubt like this jackass is doing. No offense, maybe a little bit actually, because you're debating a Nazi, quite literally, which you should never do. Because they're not actually targeting you. Like, yeah, you could say, oh, he's going after nerds, and it's like, and fascism will reject intellectual movements and modernity in favor of might makes right and stuff like that. But someone like Solomon Nelson, he's not the intelligentsia of the left, okay? He's really not. And because people on the left, generally speaking, don't debate Nazis in good faith, because Nazis don't behave in good faith. And just because this guy, Daniel Pekic, is someone that he has a conversation with and calls out and says all of this stuff, and I guess we may as well get started, just because I want to try and keep this video under like 2 hours. But yeah, so let's get started, and I'll try and address some of these points again and reiterate what I mean by Solomon Nelson being a white moderate. It's just a reality of what he is.
Talking people, and Daniel Pekic is surely one of them.
Daniel Pekic. Oops.
I value straight-talking people, and Daniel Pekic...
Okay, so he values Daniel Pekic, a person with a smaller channel and a podcast and a facial tattoo and a beard kind of thing. He has a particular look about him. He's a tough guy, and which is fine. Nothing wrong with bears and himbos and facial tattoos. That's all fine. All fine and good.
Pekic is surely one of them. He says what he thinks, and that's refreshing.
Oh, it's refreshing that he basically, as we'll see, says what he thinks, which is Nazi dogma. Oh, okay, that's good. How refreshing. So he's already kind of glazing him a bit, which isn't a good sign.
When he watched my video collaboration with Lyle McDonald critiquing Mike Israetel's fitness advice, he
Mike Israetel, yeah, okay, that's his name.
expressed his disapproval with full candor.
Did I watch the Lyle McDonald podcast with Solomon Nelson, which was critiquing Dr. Mike Israetel's fitness advice? I did, and I have this to say. I think it's gay. Moving on to something I also think...
Okay, so homophobic right off the bat. Like, again, the facial tattoos are actually kind of cool. I like the hummingbird. Is that it? I'm not sure what that says. Protein? Potato? I'm not sure. And the neck tattoo. Like, the ink, it's just some sweet ink. Not gonna lie. But saying that something's gay
is quite gay. Quantum physics theory. It's gay. It's gay. It's gay.
It's so good to have people like Lyle in the industry keeping it real.
These are all just losers.
Okay, so they're weak, they're queer, they're degenerates. Okay, how is this refreshing is the first thing that I want to ask. And, you know, there's this kayfabe kind of relationship between Daniel Pekic here and Four Eyes. And I can say Four Eyes because I used to wear glasses. And, he's the heel, he's the baby face, but they're both, you know, white cishet dudes. And so they're not really that different in terms of each other. And he's making the Nazi arguments. And he's saying, no, don't do that. And he's like, okay. And I'm getting ahead of myself because that happens later. But so he's already off to us. He's like, oh, he's so refreshing. Wow, look at him being so homophobic. So refreshing. Now I can have someone to debate. Why don't you debate actual leftists?
99% of them losers.
Daniel made
99% of them losers because they're not strong. You need a cult of strength. You need the strong man to show up and show people what real men are like. Straight men. They're not smart. They're not nerds. They're strong. So this is all just standard issue fascism out of Umberto Eco's 14 points. Right off the bat. As an anti-fascist and someone who writes about this on a regular basis, this, like, I was in the kitchen making myself something to eat when I was listening to this, because I was like, oh, okay, Solomon Nelson, he's talking about so-and-so. Maybe, you know, if he talked about Mike Israetel and how the fact that Mike Israetel is incredibly dubious individual in terms of what he's doing, though Solomon Nelson only critiques him in regards to how it affects white gym rats, basically, nothing else, that's kind of a problem because there's a lot of blind spots, because then suddenly he feels comfortable. If he can get him to agree with Solomon, then Daniel Pekic to agree with Solomon Nelson, then Nelson's like, hey, you're cool and you're refreshing. Wow, you're such a refreshing person. Wow, you're so outspoken. And wow, why are you praising him for that? That's not a virtue. Action for its own sake is another fascist talking point. Do you even know what these are? Like, you know, all these logical fallacies, and you have this debate pro kind of thing. Solomon Nelson does, another red flag. But he doesn't seem to realize what he's doing. Or maybe he does. He doesn't have to acknowledge it for him to be doing it, is the thing. That's the problem with people like this.
2 video responses to us. Let's start by examining Daniel's first video, which is titled Lyle McDonald, Mike Israetel, Jeff Nippard, and Mike Van Wyck.
When people nerd out to the point where it just becomes about those two personalities, I think it's...
Okay, but that's how... Have you ever been to an academic conference? Don't answer that, I'm sure you haven't. But if you had, you'd notice, like, if you have two authorities on a subject, they're going to debate. And this isn't just in academia, like rabbis will do this, for instance, where they'll debate with each other, like orthopraxically speaking. They'll use it as an ancient form of two people who know a lot or who are recognized as authorities, who then go on to essentially have conversations. I mean, that's what a debate is. It's an argument between two people who know things. And it is going to be about them. You know, it's a rivalry. Rivalries are healthy to academic growth and discussion.
I think that needs to stop.
Why?
I'm not into that, honestly.
Because it's gay, right? Because having a brain is gay. You have to be literally dumb, Cro-Magnon, Joe Rogan, white supremacist caveman, basically.
It's 1,000 years ago. We have had little biological drift since then, but 1,000 years ago, after some healthy debate between two people, someone doesn't like it, you go at it until maybe someone's dead. Move on.
I mean, you know, feudalism, that's kind of how that operated. I mean, he's simplifying a lot of things, but might make right is something to regress towards. So he's literally saying, go back to a time when Highlander was real, man, is what he's saying. Which again is another Nazi talking point. Reject modernity, regress to a time of a heroic cult of death. It's cool to kill each other in might makes right, unironic jousting maneuvers. Like, it's...
I think that is a better way of solving a beef.
So he's making fun of him. Okay, if you want to make fun of a Nazi, that's fine. But he's calling him out. And then the other guy, who has a smaller channel than him, of course, like it's a business maneuver. Like, you know, you can't just debate a Nazi and then he'll be like, you know what, because it's exposure, it's good for both of us, I'll have this 3-hour-long video about it. Like, this is content for these people. It's not praxis.
Rather than benefiting,
not good praxis anyways,
over 100,000 people and counting by criticizing Mike Israetel's bad advice in video format, Daniel, if I'm understanding correctly, would rather that we go medieval on each other and enter a potentially fatal physical altercation.
You go at it until maybe someone's dead. Move on. I think that...
But you see what he's doing, where he's kind of taking his arguments at face value instead of just saying, like, look, you're a Nazi. Like, just... You don't want to judge a book by a cover, but look at him and how he's talking at the same time. You know, it tracks. He's a weird canonical nerd, basically. He's in the man box, you know, and just going straight for the jugular. He's kind of like poo-pooing him. I mean, look, he thinks that's so silly. Instead of saying, no, you're a fucking Nazi, dude. Like, this is a motive invitation for the two of them to break bread, which is a mistake because Nazis are bad faith. Because given the chance, someone like him, Four Eyes, would kill the other guy, the smaller, weaker guy with glasses. So this is a mistake, but it's also something that I think Solomon Nelson is complicit in. If you debate Nazis, then you're complicit because you're breaking bread with them. Cum panis, like the people that you share your bread with, which goes back to Rome. He's like, don't worry, we can be logical about this. I'll just debate the Nazi. Good cop, bad cop. No, don't do that. That is bad. You're just as bad as him. Stop.
Is a better way of...
Because you're acting like you can reason with something like this and give them a way out. You can enrich both him, because he can say, oh, you know what, guys, take backs, you know, erases, no stampies, you know, and it's like, no, it's the same thing that Ozzy Man Reviews did, except they're doing it to each other to make their channels grow. That's the whole reason they're doing this, is to make content.
Solving a beef.
Interesting. Daniel will give his explanation.
And they're talking about solving a beef, right? Which is what happens in the next video, where it takes 3 hours, but they sit down and they have a good talk. Gee whiz. I made so much progress with this Nazi. He's not a Nazi anymore. These are deeply held beliefs. You can't just make someone, like, you can't just deprogram someone to not be a fascist in 3 hours. That's not how it works. Only an arrogant asshole thinks that you could do that, or only someone who's trying to cover up the fact that the other person is a Nazi, which Solomon Nelson doesn't even call him that. Well, that's the first thing I thought of.
For why this is a better way of solving a beef later on. So we'll examine his reasons when we...
They're both terrible. Debating a Nazi is a bad way to squash a beef. You can't reason with a Nazi, and might makes right. Punching a Nazi is actually better, if I'm being honest, than arguing with them, because they're talking to you in bad faith. And I'm not even sure that, you know, Solomon Nelson is that far removed from his politics, and we'll get to that.
We get there.
I think that that is a better way of solving
God, his forearms are hairy.
a beef
Nothing wrong with that, but it's like, Jesus.
rather than going back and forth, chopping up little film clips of he said, she said for a decade.
Like, I get it, just intellectually, if we can just get down to brass tacks and be direct in our arguments, because you can go after someone brutally academically. Have you ever seen academics go after each other? Peer review is brutal, man. It doesn't just, you don't have to result in things through physical violence, because then people are going to be afraid of you, and it doesn't like solve anything in terms of, let's do something constructive. Okay, well, I killed my neighbor. That's not constructive. You know, if you're trying to work together as a society, it's built on teamwork, not division.
I've been using the word since I was 8. I should define what I mean by I mean, we are in that woke of a society
Okay, woke, another dog whistle.
still, hopefully less post-Trump, but it's GHEY.
Hopefully less post-Trump. So he wants society to be less woke, less class conscious, less culture and race conscious, more racist and bigoted otherwise. So this isn't like he's a Nazi. Like, these are all dog whistles, and Solomon isn't calling him out on any of this shit.
Why we're calling it? Because GAE is a homosexual reference. When I say I mean lame.
The way Daniel is trying to...
They're being treated as synonymous. Degeneracy is lame in the eyes of killer cavemen who want to make the world straight in a regression to the ancient canonical codes. They're practicing sodomy accusations and carrying them out, judge, jury, and executioner. And right now they're sticking their toes in the water. And this asshole is just like, well, silly.
Justify his use of the word here with these silly language games reminds me of our ridiculous Australian Greens senator Lydia Thorpe, who claimed that she didn't breach her oath of allegiance because she swore allegiance to the Queen's heirs, not heirs.
Senator Thorpe told the ABC she never actually swore allegiance to the Queen's heirs.
And I swore allegiance to the Queen's heirs.
This is pure sophistry.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Okay, so it's calling him out for that. But just call him a Nazi, dude. You know, it's like, and I get it if you want to convince someone, like, that of what you're trying to say, you don't want them to think of you as enemy. Like, they'll be like, oh no, I can't talk to him. But the problem with fascists is they already think that you're enemy. Okay, if you belong to a group. Now, in this case, Solomon Nelson, he's like, oh, well, you're gay in the sense of, like, it's not even, it doesn't even work. It's a misnomer. Like, it's like, but it ties to the same fascist idea where fascism is saying that anti-intellectualism is comparable to being homosexual or queer more broadly, non-binary, trans, what have you. Doesn't matter. And those kind of conflations do happen. But he's also a white cishet man. And you can tell because he's censoring the word gay and he's treating it like, okay, well, I can't say this. Well, I could say gay. I could say faggot because I'm a fag. Okay. But Solomon here, I think he's probably straight. He's mentioned his girlfriend. I don't want to assume that person's gender, but I just get the vibe I'm getting from Solomon himself is that he's a cis dude in a cis relationship. It kind of shows in how he's treating this Nazi. And I'm not saying you can't have token people and stuff like that, defend Nazis too. Absolutely. But it's just like, and he can't just call him out and be like, dude, you're a Nazi. In the same way that I'd call out Mike Israetel and be like, well, dude, you're a fucking Zionist. And because Mike Israetel will talk about modernity too and the superiority of neoliberalism and shit like that. And it just blows my mind, you know, because he's Jewish and from Russia. And like it's assimilated like super fucking hard, and I don't know. It's just really weird, wild to see. But Solomon Nelson's like, no, it's like I totally believe that you're not a psycho murderer, totally, because a lot of the stuff that he's saying won't affect Solomon Nelson. They can have this polite debate because they're not really that opposed from each other. They're much closer towards each other than they are different.
The next question is about the Jeff Nippard and Mike Van Wyck scenario.
Okay, if you don't know what this Jeff Nippard, Mike Van Wyck situation is, Mike Van Wyck is this roided up fitness influencer who was charged with 2 counts of after physically my former client Jeff Nippard at Pure Muscle Fitness in Canada. Mike physically attacked Jeff following a video that Jeff posted defending his training methods against Mike's criticisms. And the incident, which was caught on video, involved Mike throat Jeff and shooting his cameraman, which led to police involvement and Mike's ban from the gym. Now let's see what Daniel has to say about this incident.
Okay, so just kind of setting the stage and being like, okay, this is the beef that they have.
I know Mike personally through Instagram. I've spoke to him a few times. Seems like reasonable lad to me.
Seems like reasonable lad to me. Seems like reasonable lad to me. Seems like reasonable lad to me.
When I saw the footage, Jeff Nippard coming up to Mike with the camera crew, again, 1,000 years ago, you do that to someone much larger than you. You risk getting your head chopped off.
You also have to keep in mind, though, that people 1,000 years ago would have actually been much smaller than they are now, like big, roided up guys on gear. And someone even, like, I can't tell if this dude's natural or not, probably not, but you never know. You know, he's a big, strong, muscular guy. He doesn't look natural, but and if he's friends with Mike Van Wyck, and who's roided, you know, birds of a feather flock together, that kind of thing. His entire identity revolves around this idea of masculinity that's literally man-made, drug-fueled, and fascism being drugged out in ways that wouldn't have existed 1,000 years ago, just during the First Reich or thereabouts. It just wasn't a thing. The men would have been smaller and weaker physically. So it's like, but that's neither here nor there. It doesn't matter. The point being is the same might makes right kind of argument. And it ties into Solomon Nelson's critique, which, fine, whatever. Domestic violence is a bad thing. Sure, absolutely. But he's not saying anything about his politics, except he's doing the same thing that Ozzy Man Reviews did, where he'll play some music and a funny little clip and he'll make a joke, but he's not like, you know what, you're a fucking Nazi, dude. Because he is.
So I think because authorities are in the mix, especially in Canada or where I'm from in Australia, it's given the confidence to smaller, weaker, less skilled or less ballsy characters to come up to people like that. It's not.
He's the kind of guy that they would send to the original prison colony to colonize the indigenous population. Like, yeah, we're strong, manly men, and we're gonna tame the wild, and we're gonna, you know, behead Medusa and all of these other things. And it's just like, that ideology is something that certainly existed maybe 500 years ago, 400 years ago, thereabouts is when it started to form. Not really any earlier than that in terms of like racial supremacy, which is why, you know, fascist rhetoric is ontological. Solomon Nelson isn't really mentioning any of that.
Natural.
I do want to spend a bit of time addressing this "it's not natural" remark, because it seems to be the main thrust behind Daniel's earlier argument against our Mike Israetel critique. I think what Daniel is trying to say here is that because it's not natural for a smaller guy to criticize or confront a bigger guy...
You see, and he's basically arguing with this guy through his own words and giving him a certain amount of power by not just calling him out and being like, you know what, you're a Nazi. Because the moment you do that, the conversation's basically over because you out the person. You pants them. Hey, look, he has swastikas on his boxer shorts. That's it. It's over. And that's what you need to do. You need to shut this kind of thing down and not give them an inch to work any kind of argument, because what he's doing is he's humoring him, which again is a white moderate thing. Therefore, ultimately, just fascism with a mask, because he's helping mask him. Therefore, he's his friend. And the level of complicity is up to debate, but useful idiots are still useful towards fascism, which is what he's doing.
It's not good for a smaller guy to criticize or confront a bigger guy. In Daniel's view, this dynamic wouldn't have happened in nature. Therefore, it's bad. 2 things to comment on. First of all, Daniel is wrong that in nature, bigger humans don't get challenged or usurped by smaller ones. Humans are clever. They don't just rely on physical bulk and strength to dominate others. Historically, the most powerful
Child Pharaoh, I believe.
Humans have relied primarily
Alexander the Great. So he was a statesman, and he would persuade people to fight for him, fight for glory, infinite military conquest.
On weapons, words, connections.
Okay, so basically, this is the white supremacist kind of thing, because he's like, humans are clever. Do you see any people of color? Do you see any activists? No, you see military conquerors. This is a problem. Again, Julius Caesar, is a tyrant and someone who would attack other people through might makes right, and he's like, oh, humans are clever, they use all of these things, but he's overlooking the fact that someone like Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great absolutely would take a big, strong man, be like, you know what, I can work with this, and I can pit this against my enemies. What do you think Hitler did? And from there, he's overlooking the role that muscle plays in fascist arguments that go all the way back ontologically, which is to exist between the past and the present, and kind of it doesn't quite belong in the present, it doesn't quite belong in the past, but yet here we are. So he's evoking great men of history in ways that are white supremacist, and appealing or reasoning with this other person, Daniel Pekic, and it's like, oh, well, and, he could be appealing to him in his own language, but this is the kind of language that, Solomon Nelson, what leaps to mind for him. No, don't appeal to the Nazi using Nazi language. Talking about Caesar or Alexander the Great. Talk about the fact that, he's kind of falling victim to the argument or playing along with the argument in some shape or form by debating this guy and being like, well, think of it this way, and I'm not going to critique you. I'm going to sort of, find common ground is what he's doing. And that's a problem. He should absolutely not be doing that.
Cunning. Not
Cunning, yes.
fisticuffs, nor pistols at door.
And he has Napoleon Bonaparte, the ogre, the tyrant, an emperor, someone who took, liberty, fraternity, egalitarianism, and the French Revolution, and was something that he weaponized in a way to push himself to the French imperial throne, and he used a lot of dead French soldiers to do that. But why are these virtues? Again, he's finding common ground with this guy to point out, hey, there are all these strong men of history, these little tiny dudes. Hitler was a short little weirdo. And he's not condemning these values. He's just dressing it up in white moderacy. Solomon Nelson, that is. And he's like, you're a dumb caveman. You need someone to lead you. Oh my God.
Dawn, nor however Daniel thinks our human ancestors fought. Second, even if human nature worked the way Daniel claims it does, his argument relies on the appeal to nature fallacy, which is the claim that just because something is natural, it's good, right, or superior.
So the whole point of this conversation is for him to basically be like, debate bro time, I'm going to debate you for brownie points that make Solomon Nelson look special. So he's debating with someone that he's admitted is dumb, so that he can basically act like the white moderate. They are the baby face and the heel in this particular kayfabe argument, something that comes to fruition later when they squash the beef. Oh, well, behold, they're suddenly friends, and it's like, it doesn't matter. We don't have to prove anything because the proof is in the pudding, the way that they're talking. He's talking about great men of history with a similar degree of admiration. He's just saying, actually, it's the little guys that can conquer the world.
Ignoring the fact that not all natural things are beneficial and not all
Natural things that can be considered bad include venomous snake bites, though venomous snake bites also contain antidotes, anti-venom, poisonous plants, such as poison ivy, harmful bacteria like botulism, extreme weather events like hurricanes and tornadoes, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, acts of God, radiation from natural resources like radon, and certain naturally occurring toxins like mercury or arsenics in high concentrations. I will say Parasocial, there are no poisons, only poisonous doses. The dose doth make the poison, so it depends, but I don't want to split hairs or anything, but just weighing in on that. But again, he's debating this guy in good faith when he really shouldn't, which makes me think they're both bad faith. He's just the white moderate side of the good cop, bad cop equation. That's all that this is.
All artificial things are harmful. Indeed. I think Daniel implicitly recognizes that some unnatural or artificial things are good when he injects synthetic hormones up his arse cheeks, which is a practice that Daniel has many videos extolling the benefits of. For Daniel, it seems that unnatural things are only bad when...
Slight mild homophobia there, up his ass cheeks. You don't inject something up your ass cheeks. Up your ass, I think is what he was going to say, but then said up one's ass cheeks, into one's ass cheeks. Mild homophobia there. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that.
They don't suit him, such as when a bigger guy is critiqued by a smaller guy.
So basically, it's the same argument, but one guy's like, bigger guy, and he's like, no, little guy. So it's four legs bad, 2 legs good, 2 legs good, 4 legs better. It's the same kind of like Orwellian approach to things where both sides of the argument are bad. They're still white supremacist. He's just taking the other side of it. But they're still basically debating for white supremacy.
It's more natural to keep your mouth shut and to be feared getting a spear in the side so that you can practice.
Spears aren't natural.
It's good manners. I think we are losing manners.
Good manners and social structures as they exist presently under like written cultures are also not natural.
In the generations to come, because there is less threat, at least in developed Western societies where, policing is rampant. We're losing our manners.
So he's talking about manners, but he's also talking about like a return to manliness, a return to when men were men, Conan the Barbarian, days of high adventure. And he's defining the value of human existence as strong. And it's like, okay, and the other guys, actually, no, I'm going to make the Enlightenment side of that argument, which is tied to race science and eugenics, by the way, historically. And that is unto itself a problem. So they're making two sides of the same coin in terms of their argument. He's not, again, I'm just calling them both out on their bullshit, but he's humoring him. So that, in my opinion, they're both bad faith, and they're both trying to elevate each other. He doesn't care. He's like, oh, well, I totally showed him. I'm like, yeah, but you're making white supremacist arguments too. Like,
I mean, this is bizarre.
Daniel has an interesting
I will say that Daniel Pekic kind of sounds a little bit dumb. Like, actually dumb. Like, no offense, but just like, he's like, oh, it's bizarre. It's gay. People talking? You should be stabbing each other. Like, he sounds like a himbo. And I don't mean that in a bad way onto just the word himbo by itself, because, Goku's a himbo. He's totally lovable, though actually he's a total psycho too. Now that I think of it, but, someone can be dumb and lovable or endearing. This Daniel Pekic guy is not very smart. And this guy, it's like a Master Blaster, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome kind of thing. But the problem is that his arguments really aren't any better in terms of, like, from a praxial standpoint. He's still basically a Western liberal.
Definition of manners. He seems to believe that there's a natural order where smaller guys respect bigger guys.
All he cares about is the smaller guys. So he's fighting for nerds. White conservative nerds like Napoleon and Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar.
Presumably to avoid being beaten up, and he thinks of this natural order as manners. It seems that Daniel missed the memo that the word manners has a common use definition which is about politeness to all people, regardless of whether they're tougher or weaker than you.
I will say that, social mores and folkways and taboos are defined from culture to culture. So some people might be like, oh, well, it's good manners to punch someone in the face. Like, yeah, like certain cultures. Look at the Klingons in Star Trek for a fictional example. Where they're like, yes, strong. Oh, you are very strong. Headbutt, and they headbutt each other. I like you. And, yeah, okay. So it's like Daniel Pekic's idea of manners is idiosyncratic, but it's also something that's shared by actually a large group of people. It's not like he's saying that, oh, well, it's isolated. And it's just this weird little fascist guy that he doesn't actually call a fascist. He's like, no, pay no attention to that. It's not connected to anything. Manners are about being nice and polite, which is a very white moderate thing to say, therefore a white supremacist thing. But it's actually kind of more than that.
Moreover, I find it ironic that Daniel rails against wokeness and language policing when it comes to his use of the word but he clutches his pearls when people are impolite to him. This is rules for thee, but not for me.
Yeah, he's right.
Because to be honest,
it's like, okay, yeah, all right. Oh, you're on the tip. Okay, now, why is he doing it? Why is he doing it? Say that. And he doesn't. He doesn't say it.
With you, if that little kid, I mean, I know he's not a little kid, but
he's not. That's the thing. Like, this guy's, Jeff Nippard is not small. Like, he has a lovely body. Like, he's not my type. Like, I'm into femme boys. Just femme boys, cat boys, K-pop kind of. I don't really like K-pop, the music, but just like, if you think of a K-pop artist, that feminine kind of cutie, a very feminine kind of boy, androgynous kind of stuff. I mean, I could talk all day about cute boys, but I'm not really into like otters, the more muscular, masculine kind of men. Just not my thing. If somebody likes it, that's totally fine. I like them as fictional characters and stories. Oslo and Helsinki from was it Money Heist? Wonderful characters, and there's these big teddy bears, and it's just like they're really fucking cool. But in terms of someone that I'm attracted to, he's obviously talking about him homosocially. I'm talking about this person as a trans woman would, and I'm just being like, look, he's not really my thing. And he's not a good looking guy, just conventionally, but really narrow waist. And he has a little bit of chest hair. Just I could run my fingers through it maybe. But he's just not. I could sleep with him, but it's just that's how I feel about it. But he's like, he's small. I'm big. I have bigorexia. He's comfortable in his body. I don't like that. And so I will agree with Solomon that there is this kind of like big man, little man kind of thing. And that is an interesting point, but he doesn't tie to the fact that this guy's a Nazi and he's saying all these Nazi things. And maybe Solomon doesn't recognize the symbols, but there's a lot of red flags and dog whistles in his own stuff. It's moderate, but it's still there. Because how can you be this ignorant in 2025 about this kind of shit? Gee, I don't know. Maybe if none of these issues affect you.
It looks like one. If he come up to me and
like, can you imagine having a debate like this about this particular subject and not really talking about anything outside of the fitness industry in 2025 when everything that's happening in America that's going to be affecting other parts of the world? And there's so many different things happening in terms of the economy and Nazis and Elon Musk and all of that. And he's talking about this to try and grow his channel in the middle of a genocide and the rise of fascism around the world. Kind of telling for someone as smart as he is and who's fixating on, when little men ruled the world, we'll do it again. And that's what he's talking about with this guy instead of, actually doing something actively helpful and beneficial to marginalized peoples. Gee, I don't know.
Could get away with it.
I'd probably do the same thing.
And again, he's like sort of finger admonishing him and being like, and making a joke out of it. for content. Same thing that Ozzy Man Reviews did.
We do the same thing.
Daniel, you can't be saying that. Look.
No, dear boy, you can't do that. You have to keep the mask on.
If you were Jeff Nippard, it would work out just as well for you as it did for Mike Van Wyck, which is to say, not very well.
At the end of the day, we're human.
And he assumes that like there's this logical kind of order to the universe, and criminals get punished, and so on and so forth. It's like, well, no, because granted, white cishet men are the most privileged group, but when the shit hits the fan and fascism begins to rise, the state is going to become the enemy. It's not like, oh, it's like he's ignoring the existence of fascism right now and assuming that the cops are the good guys. All cops are bad, dickhead.
Human. Mike is human.
I do want to push back
Yes, okay, Mike's human, sure.
Against an aspect of this Mike is human claim. Yes, Mike Van Wyck is a human, but he has massively amplified aggressiveness compared to most humans because of his excessive, irresponsible drug stack.
And where does that come from? White supremacy.
So I don't know if the...
Nope, he doesn't say that. Like, again, he doesn't talk about the ideology. Like, he'll talk about the Simpsons so far as it concerns his profession, but he never goes outside of that. It's like they're just talking in a bubble. This is an echo chamber.
Way that Mike reacted to Jeff is a natural human response as such. In fact, I think if anything, it'd be more likely to be an unnatural human response, since humans in nature didn't abuse synthetic hormones that make them violently roid rage over words on a screen.
Yeah, and I'd say that's okay, fair enough. That's a good argument. And again, it's like he's getting down to the minutia without having like a broad thesis tied to something useful praxially, which is Nazis are bad, cops are bad. But he deliberately ignores all of that to just start getting down in the fine nitty-gritty of things. It's like you need a thesis.
And then more with Lyle McDonald, hopefully on evolutionary psychology and behavior and this sort of stuff is what I'm interested in.
I don't think your next podcast with Lyle McDonald is happening anytime soon.
Gatekeeping.
Let's move on now to video number 2, which is titled, Are Nerds Changing the World?
So Daniel Pekic doesn't want to be a nerd anymore. So he used to be a nerd. There should be a comma there. Are nerds changing the world or just flexing their knowledge? That's a valid question. It's like if you have people who are like thought leaders or who are paid to act a certain way, even if they're not really that smart, like Elon Musk, for instance. Like a nerd is as much an identity nowadays tied to capital as it is like, I don't know, like alchemists from the 16 and 1700s, like Isaac Newton or someone like that, who were also, tied to white supremacy, but...
World, or just flexing their knowledge.
Nerds. The most intelligent people on the planet. They have...
Well, no, I mean, you can't just say that someone's a nerd and IQ can be quantified because that's a white supremacist idea with racist implications.
The highest IQ, yet they are lower on the social ladder. They tend to be ridiculed, and they aren't leaders of society.
So, again, me, big, strong man, so, again, fascism weaponizes muscle like this. But the guys that are in control of the propaganda usually they're not stupid, at least in terms of manipulating people.
The last I checked, there were no nerd presidents.
Are there really no nerd presidents? I think you can...
Now here's another white supremacist red flag. Well, I'm going to defend presidents. Like, cops of the executive branch of the United States. And Western countries imitating that model to some degree or another, imitators of the imperial core dominating the rest of the world.
You can see nerds in positions of
the global north predating the global south, essentially.
Power everywhere. Think Kevin Rudd, Lee Kuan Yew.
I don't know who those people are, but...
In fact, there's a great comment on Daniel's video pointing out that the majority of people who run the world is made up of nerds.
You mean the owner class? Oh yeah, that's a good thing to apologize for. So you're basically, it's capitalist realism and you're apologizing for the bourgeoisie. Yep, you're a white supremacist.
Think. Bezos.
Bezos.
Gates.
Gates. Zuckerberg. They're all fucking oligarchs, dude. God, you're a Nazi. No wonder you're debating Nazis. You're one of them.
Zuckerberg. Bankers. Politicians.
Bankers, politicians, all white, powerful men for the most part. The status quo.
Etc.
And
why so you're like actually the bourgeoisie are who are in control, but you're not challenging that. You're not challenging him. You're just trying to convince him you should submit to your bourgeois overlords. What?
argue that the majority of nerds do not spend the majority of their life on productive endeavors. Rather,
productive in the sense that, through Raj Patel and Jason Moore, they move money through nature, in regards to Marx's idea of capital. Like, capital is a system of moving money through nature to generate profit from material goods into the raw resources, back and forth, over and over, generally through various arguments, us versus them, the process of objection. That's my area. They're actually quite productive. Now, they're not as productive as like performing strength, which is what fascism is and what dumb nerds, little men, use to maintain their own positions of power. And see how none of this is what Solomon Nelson is saying? Solomon Nelson is like, American presidents are totally okay. Like Richard Nixon, he's totally fine. Andrew Jackson, he's a great guy because he's a nerd and he's middle. And he can exploit people with his brain. Oh, okay, that's great.
They spend the majority of their life nerding out, oftentimes against other nerd. It's a nerdathon, if you will. Let me give you an example.
And the thing is like, there's often a kernel of truth to conservative arguments with their leery of modernity, except what they do is they end up blaming all nerds and gay people, and they don't have the language to actually be good critics of the state. They'll punch down against certain figures and they'll scapegoat them, but they won't critique them as a whole organized body, and they'll oftentimes go after state scapegoats. So they'll be like, Jeff Bezos is gay. He's degenerate. But then what they end up doing in real life is they'll be sort of marshaled and told to attack specific marginalized groups through stochastic terrorism by little smart nerds. So it's like, if you can just redirect that in a way that was actually good praxis, but he doesn't do that. Solomon Nelson doesn't do that with Daniel Pekic. He's like, actually, no, trust in your rulers, master slave. Alexander the Great was a stand-up guy.
I saw this on Twitter the other day. There was a nerd, this is so gay, that argued against 2 + 2 = 4.
Daniel's argument here that nerds are generally more focused on being right than helping people isn't supported with any evidence besides this
historical materialism, might makes right, in God we trust, American exceptionalism, free enterprise, neoliberalism, revenge fantasies, basically from Reagan onwards, and even before that, if we're honest, like Starship Troopers nuking the Asia from Douglas MacArthur and Harry Truman, and again, very much these smart little nerds made a nuclear bomb and nuked Japan twice with it, for example, and then threw the world into a Cold War. Is very much about jousting and being right. There's plenty of evidence, so he's basically ignoring the facts and doing the capitalist realism thing. Again, it's the white moderate saying, no. I feel like I'm looking at my axe, but like a male version.
It's Twitter debate anecdote, so I'm inclined to dismiss it.
Well, actually,
I'm inclined to dismiss it, while also ignoring there's no evidence, which is bullshit, Solomon.
Actually, when you weigh up left and when you weigh it right, I can consider this, but you can consider that. You're just not giving any strong guidance, which is one.
Yeah, it's often something that's seen that, okay, men need to be strong so they can lead people out of times of trouble, because you can solve all these problems just by bonking them with a club, which is obviously not true. But then Solomon's like, oh, actually, no, put your faith in all of these scientists, like Operation Paperclip and all those Nazi scientists that America absorbed into itself and Russia absorbed into itself to compete against each other during the Cold War. And yeah, that's not sure I agree with that either.
One of the reasons why the most popular fitness coaches in the world are not nerds. They're people that have a strong opinion, and people that just go, rather than constantly interpreting research left and right over the last 20 years without any pragmatic answers.
Now,
answers in regards to the collapse of civilization due to boom and bust under capital's historical material cycle. So what we're seeing now is just what happened a century ago, obviously within the internet age, in an increasingly globalized world, a world that is less dependent on nation-state models and is more corporatized, moving towards a techno-oligarchy that is regressing towards a kind of privatized mode of war that existed during the Renaissance period, during the late medieval period. That's kind of what's happening. And, Daniel Pekic is like a scared dog. He's noticing that, and he wants some kind of leader to lead him out of the darkness. That's a human response. And he's like, oh, no, don't worry about it. So it's like Solomon Nelson has his head in the sand just as more so, because he's more confident in capital. He's not even addressing any of these things that I'm discussing. It's like there's no evidence for it. According to who? It's fucking everywhere, dude.
I actually agree with Daniel here. I prefer when people, especially public fitness educators, give strong guidance and straight answers whenever they can.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
In fact, Mike Israetel would do well to follow Daniel.
The problem with, well, whatever, I'll leave that for another video, but...
Daniel's advice here, and stop overcomplicating things and vacillating from video to video about seemingly every topic he discusses.
But they're all basically talking about the same things. It's like, okay, you could sum up your whole profession in, okay, I'm natty. They're not. But you need to go beyond that and talk about things outside of yourself if you want to be active and help people. Because who are you helping right now? The only thing you're doing, you're like Ozzy Man Reviews, where you sold your car to make some money, but you're not even doing that because you're not even talking, you're not even being like, hey, this is dodgy, this isn't okay, whatever. You're literally debating a Nazi right now. So instead of Ozzy Man Reviews, where he talks himself away from, he distances himself from the Nazi, you're actually getting in bed with the Nazi and debating him. Being like, well, now here, I can use you to push my channel further and make content. That's a problem.
Yesterday, I was commenting on the podcast between Lyle McDonald and Solomon Nelson. He, to me, is wasting his time refuting Dr. Mike Israetel because of this beef that they have.
Yeah, I would argue that he's not wrong. It's like, okay, you guys could be talking about something important, in a way that, I feel like a lot of times, if you want people to pay attention, there has to be some kind of rivalry. Rivalries can be incredibly public. So I don't know. Is it really a complete waste of time? If it goes back and forth and you're just saying the same thing over and over, repetition is important during rebellion and stuff like that. But if you're not doing any kind of activism, I would agree. It is a waste of time. I wish the activism that they had went beyond natty or natural athletes that seem to be fixated primarily around white cishet men, or just cis men more broadly, women a little bit, though this problem largely affects men because the idea of bigorexia is something that's aimed at men through drug abuse. So it is a particular kind of drug epidemic that does have a target audience. But at the same time, fascism doesn't, and a lot of these things go outside of what Solomon Nelson is either qualified or willing to talk about. He'll talk about great men of history, and he'll talk about how there's no evidence supporting that, smart men are more interested in being right than they are helping people. Capitalism doesn't help people. It exploits people. That's its only purpose. It's incompatible with life. It's a system of theft through wage slavery and labor theft, more broadly, a system of exploitation. That's all that it is. That's all that it does. And he's saying that there's no evidence. Where have you been for the past your whole life?
It's all about, well, he said that over there, and then he shouldn't say that over there. It's like, bro, if you have content, just say it. Educate people.
Yeah, that's fair. I will say that the content that Solomon Nelson and Lyle McDonald, is, for what it is, like it's not bad in terms of the use of the obese slur is the problem, and that is something that, and they don't really go beyond talking about athletes more broadly. Like athletes in competition is what they talk about a lot of the time. I do think that Solomon Nelson does kind of branch out a little bit into athleticism more broadly. And it's a little weird because sometimes I get the feeling that, I have this body and look at how right I am. I'm very statuesque. It's a very Eugene Sandow approach to thing. It's a status thing, and they make a science out of it, and then they make a meal out of that. And, it's like, it's fine up to a point, but then when I see them debating Nazis, suddenly I'm like, actually, fuck all that. And it's like we should be talking about Nazis right now instead of convincing them that actually working out's cool, and that'll make the world a better place because it's already fine for us. We're not being affected by all the bullshit that's happening with Nazis by people like Daniel Pekic, who Solomon Nelson is basically appeasing and supporting and finding common ground with him and making content with him in this heel babyface kayfabe kind of thing. And it's like, no, it's like this is bad praxis.
And they can make their own decisions.
That's exactly what we did. And the overwhelming response was, "Thank you for helping me see through Mike's bad advice. This video was highly educational."
Okay, that's good. More power to him. But in a time when climate change is happening and various other problems like, Nazis and genocide at home and abroad, we really should be using these platforms to talk about different things that are much more important than whether or not someone has a six-pack. Physical fitness is fine, but it is ultimately, plays second fiddle to whether or not the planet catches on fire and we all burn to death. Even just from a self-preservation standpoint, it's like if you can't even do it for that, your head's in the sand.
The response, as measured by the like to dislike ratio, was overwhelmingly positive. People got something from our video.
Like, who the F is Dr. Mike Israetel anyway? He's a brilliant businessman.
Yeah.
Now he has the popularity.
You know what? Sure. I accept that Mike Israetel is a brilliant businessman. But how is that relevant to our critique of his information?
If it was someone less popular, would Lyle McDonald...
And the thing is he's like, okay, well, your argument's dumb. And the thing is, I'll give it to Solomon. It's like there are certain moments where he has this debate bro thing and he's owning him in the marketplace, the free marketplace of ideas, but he's not really talking about things that matter outside of his tiny little world, where he's not being affected by these things in any noticeable way. And if he is, he's certainly not saying it. He spends the whole video just talking about what this guy said and why he's dumb and why capitalism is good just the way it is, and small, powerful men are really cool, actually.
Donald have that to say about it? No, because if you can get at Dr. Mike Israetel, that gives you nerd points.
It does. It's a clout thing, and that ties to content. He's not wrong about that.
You get up.
Daniel is right that we wouldn't bother with Mike Israetel if he weren't so popular. But that has nothing to do with nerd points. It has to do
Yes, it does.
with the fact that Mike's popularity means that his bad advice can reach, and therefore harm,
two things can be true at the same time. Like, you can point that out and be like, that's all we're doing. No, you're doing it for clout. Like, you can do both. But you're making content, just like you're debating this guy right now. And you could say, maybe you're trying to walk him back on some stuff, and who knows, maybe. But you're also going to give yourself a pat on the back and act like, yep, okay, I made all the difference. And it's like, no, you need to go to the source of the problem. Because even, let's say you just convince him and he just magically suddenly, well, what if you turn him into yourself and your opinions, which really aren't radical at all, which is a huge problem, which means that you're going to apologize for the state, which is destroying the planet. So what's more important, having a nice physique while the world burns, or maybe putting out the fire, Emperor Nero?
That many more people. Surely, Daniel would agree that there's a higher net public benefit in debunking a fraud with a big audience.
Or, better yet, breaking capitalist realism and moving away from a system that just rapes and destroys everything.
Compared to a small one.
So if you got your little tribe, which I see in the comments like,
It's so good to have people like Lyle in the industry keeping it real.
look at your little nerd anom keyboard warrior group. These are all just losers.
You know, it's funny, but I actually kind of agree with Daniel a little bit. And what I mean by that is, they have this platform where they could be doing some actual activism, and they're just concerned with helping a very select group of people, which is people who look like them. And that's it. And it's like, no, Daniel's fucking right. Weird.
99% of them, losers. Low on the social ladder, probably have terrible physiques.
Okay, that doesn't matter. You were doing so well.
No, I don't think my audience comprises losers with bad physiques. You know, my video's been well received by elite naturals and IFBB pros.
See, he's concerned with the Olympian physique, the Eugene Sandow. Did you know that the Olympics were actually outlawed by the Roman Empire for being pagan? And they weren't revived until the late 1800s. And if I understand correctly, the idea of the Olympics that we know of them today was largely championed by the Nazis and the Western powers more broadly. So when you hear about people talking about elite, Mr. Olympia, that statuesque Eugene Sandow imaginary antiquity that's tied to traditional male values and Western supremacy, therefore white supremacy, he's Solomon Nelson's. You see him pushing back against any of that? No.
Alike, consider IFBB pro Greg Doucette.
Greg Doucette is Greg Doucette's an interesting person. He's certainly knows his stuff when it comes to competing, getting that statuesque body, which is a total vanity project. That's the thing, is bodybuilding, like Lyle McDonald, when he talks about that kind of stuff, he's like, it's not for health, it's where you starve yourself and you eat a bunch and you try and get yourself to look a particular way, which just so happens is a whitewashed statuesque view of an imaginary past that's white supremacist. So it's like, it's all a vanity project tied to, frankly speaking, eugenics and fascist dogmatic posturing. It's literally a cult of the strongman. But there's a moderate white component to that, a white moderate component to that, and then there's a fascist component, a good cop, bad cop kind of thing. But it comes from the same background, culturally speaking, which is bad. And Solomon's not challenging any of that.
IFBB pro, WNBF pro, Jeffrey Verity Schofield, Atlas Power Shrugged, Chris Jones, Vegan Gains, who benched 410 as a natty vegan. You gotta hand it to him. The list goes on.
And again, it's all about, like, they care more, like, these are nerd points because these are all like, we're nerds, but we're buff. So it's the Bruce Banner syndrome, where they're small, but then they have this desire to find recognition. Solomon Nelson wants to be liked and respected by Daniel Pekic, who's bigger than him. And in that sense, it's like I'm getting this vibe of insecurity, little man syndrome, Napoleon. I want the big guy to like me so I can manipulate and use him in ways that sort of conform to particular systemic issues that I'm not talking about at all in my videos in regards to the person that I'm finding common ground with. That's an issue.
This is just a baseless assertion on Daniel's part.
Which is another thing we can talk about. Is it?
It's not baseless. There's actually a kernel of truth to it. I'm not saying that Daniel Pekic is especially, like, he's kind of a dummy, but he's not totally wrong. And when he says, he's obviously using some slurs and he's a fascist and all of that, but he's got a lot of problems. But there is a kernel of truth to what he's saying. He's like, yeah, these a lot of times fascists in defense of capital will kill those in power, the Night of the Long Knives, and similar movements, and which is really just the heel stomping the baby face, that kind of thing. But they're just two sides of the same coin fighting over the same toy, which is the imperium, the state.
Ironic or not that a lot of these educators have average physiques.
Yeah, let's talk about our physiques. Me, I'm actually very proud of.
He's like, he's literally flexing on him right now. They're both like posturing. They're not that different from each other. It's just that Solomon, again, is a white moderate. The whole point of this is vanity and capitalist realism. That's all that it is. And he's breaking bread with a Nazi and debating him to keep things the same. He's not trying to change anything. He already thinks that the world's fine as is. The only problem is that there's just some white people that are being affected by a drug epidemic. That's all.
What I've achieved naturally. Meanwhile, I don't ever see Daniel taking his shirt off and showing what he's achieved with his copious drug stack. But more to the point, what do our physiques even matter? You can have great advice despite having a mediocre physique, and likewise, you can have an excellent physique and talk rubbish.
It's true.
A shows what? Oh, they spend all their time helping others? Not always.
Yep, that's true.
Or is it B, the training methods don't really matter that much? They all work. There's 1,000 ways to skin a cat.
Yeah, that's true. And, honestly, the thing is that if you take gear and you can do it relatively responsibly, like with, what's his name? Not Jeff Nippard. The guy who sounds like the parrot from Aladdin, Greg Doucette, is obviously, he's like, look, you can take a certain amount of drugs and it's relatively healthy. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger took drugs in the 70s and he's still alive today, and he's in his 70s. So something like that is very much like, it's not, there are no poisons, only poisonous doses. So it's like, but you don't hear Solomon talking about that because he's very like anti-drugs all the way. And I would argue, like hormone therapy is something that trans people do, for instance. And also hormone therapy is something that straight people do too, because steroids, anabolic steroids, were originally synthesized to help old men with medical conditions. So there is a medical function. There are no poisons, only poisonous doses. So Solomon's kind of almost like anti-drugs, and he responds like very negatively in ways that are just as hostile and standoffish as Daniel Pekic.
And most of the top physiques, they know this. They know this. They know that the training means diddly.
The training only means...
Yeah, in terms of if they're on a drug stack, absolutely. He's not wrong.
Means diddly when you're blasting gear like Daniel or Mike Van Wyck or Mike Israetel, because gear covers up mistakes in training and...
The only thing that Solomon cares about in this whole conversation is whether or not someone's taking drugs or not. That's literally all that he cares about. It's a drug war, which is historically a white supremacist concept.
Lets you grow no matter what you do in the weight room. And this is...
It's like he's not wrong, but it's also, who cares? It's like, obviously, if you want to be like, look, a drug epidemic, it's a serious thing, we should take it seriously. Yeah, absolutely. But there are also other issues that we should talk about as well, like Nazis or climate change. Much bigger and more pressing issues than, because it will kill the whole planet. There will be no one left to pump iron.
There's a point that Lyle and I argued comprehensively in our video. But for...
There's also, I guess, this particular phenomenon is kind of like the totem pole paradox, where those at the top think that they are the most important, when in reality it's the base holding everything up. Without honeybees or ants or decomposers or the smallest units of life, which are being affected drastically by climate change, people like Solomon Nelson and Daniel Pekic wouldn't exist. And that's just the cold hard truth. But they think that they're the center of the universe. Everything revolves around them. And that's all that they really talk about, is jousting with each other. So they're both stupid.
Naturals, correct training is massively important. If you don't train right as a natural, that is, you train like Mike Israetel, or you follow Mike Israetel's advice to train more than the pro bodybuilders you follow,
you should probably train more than the pro bodybuilders you follow.
Then you'll likely just spin your wheels, go nowhere, and /or get injured. So I reject the claim.
Okay, yeah, that's valid. You know, and there's nothing wrong with being a professional, like, athletic coach. But, you know, a lot of these conversations get into, like, arguments about history and reason and the value of capital. And he's awfully quiet about the harmful aspects of capitalism. Antagonize nature, put it to work. That's all that capital does. And there's plenty of evidence for that. Unless, like, I don't know, you're a white supremacist who puts his head in the sand and debates Nazis. Like, then maybe, I don't know.
That Daniel is making here about the training meaning diddly. Unless you're a drug pig, this sentiment
drug pig
is misleading and defeatist, and I despise it.
So again, you know, he's being nice, but then also, like, there's some pretty hostile language there, and drug pig, I don't know. Like, if someone has a drug like that they're abusing, it's a disease. Like, it's a debilitating condition. It is something that they can't necessarily control, that they're addicted to, and he's acting like, oh, I can just talk to you like you dumb Frankenstein, me, Victor Frankenstein, talking to the creature. Like, it's just a form of supremacy. Like, again, it's the Master Blaster thing from Mad Max 3. And also Thus Sprach Zarathustra and the whole, I don't know. It's really 2001. Come on.
There was a nerd. This is so gay.
For all Daniel's talk about his problem with nerds, I think he lacks insight into what his real problem is. The deeper problem with nerds for
fascism,
Daniel, is that they destabilize his fantasy world order, where in virtue of his physical bulk, he imagines himself to be superior, a bit like a king.
So he's bursting his bubble, but he's not bursting capitalist realism. Come on.
This is folly, and nerds can easily expose it. Nerds are the enemy of delusion.
Or they generate delusion through capitalist realism to get people to exploit each other and exploit people like Daniel Pekic to boot.
Because they have the enduring power of calling it out. And for that reason.
So you have the power to call someone out, but then you can't talk about the bigger picture because you're pacified, you're a traitor, you're a cop. You're literally policing his conversation to maintain the status quo. That's betrayal in its purest form.
Nerds earn the contempt and hatred of any would-be king.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You're going against divine right. But who do you serve? You've cited all of these men of history that are functionally no different than kings. Alexander the Great, a warrior king. Julius Caesar, the Emperor of Rome. Napoleon Bonaparte, you know, the ogre of France. Like, American presidents who are functionally no different than kings. They're oligarchs, and they organize power in a pyramid arrangement that is what kings could only hope to aspire to in the ancient world.
Because nerds
suck. The Enlightenment is a bad thing. Now, that doesn't mean that science isn't useful, and obviously we want to reclaim the means of production and the superstructure, and there's this whole conversation about that, but you don't even try and approach that. You're just like nerds. Who are nerds? White, cishet Christo-fascists? Like, or men such as yourself? You strike me as more like agnostic or an atheist kind of person with a new skeptic kind of thing. And I don't know, it's weird vibes.
Can say, this world of make-believe that you're inhabiting isn't noble, but sick and abject and pathetic.
Okay. What is it? Come on, fascism, say it.
Because of Daniel's
God, way to bury the leading. You don't even say it. You're just like, okay, come on. It's the same thing with Ozzy Man review. Just call a spade, Jesus.
Rant against nerds, he's shown us something that we wouldn't have otherwise understood. The world of bodybuilding contains a fairy tale pride, where
Yeah, but you're the liberal side of that, apologizing for the decay, trying to bring it over to the side of reason. Like Hercules has gone mad, and you're the god of reason, talking him out of killing his family.
a certain steroidal giants feel an imaginary empowerment, and others must pay court. To protect this illusion, Reuters like Daniel...
Reuters. Like, again, there's this strange lack of empathy. You know, it's like, oh, you're a dumb writer. You're a drug pig. You're obese. Like, there's this medical kind of superiority to it, but also just lots of white supremacist kind of slurs against their own group. You know, it's so like this sort of divide and conquer where it's literally the nerds versus the jocks in a way where they both kind of suck. Because if you've ever seen Revenge of the Nerds, they both kind of suck in that movie. And this is no different. And this is like 40 years after that movie was made.
And Mike Van Wyck despise and fear the nerd, the person who comes along with
the nerd who's only me
questions that burst the bubble. Because the
I'm going to burst your bubble.
Nerd can denounce and dethrone and call the false supremacy for what it is.
As opposed to what? Your supremacy, which isn't false? Like,
not a triumph of the strong, but a crutch for the weak. Without Daniel's video,
So he's like, it's kind of mean-spirited, where he's like, you're a drug addict, you're a pig, you're stupid. Like, it's pretty vituperative.
I've had no idea that this dynamic is going on. And I think that Daniel has inadvertently helped us understand something about a part of bodybuilding culture that we'd have otherwise had no idea about.
Really? Are you sure? Have you ever seen people compete? They can be pretty fucking nasty. So it's like you're stroking his ego.
I've been using the word gay since I was gay. I mean, that certified gay, that was gay. Seems like a reasonable lad to me. I'd probably do the same thing.
Notice how he doesn't say the word homophobia. Like, he doesn't call him out even for that. He doesn't say that's homophobic in the whole video.
Quantum physics theory. It's gay.
Again, he's using it as content. It's like an attraction where he has like this ape in a cage, and he's like, behold, the stupid barbarian, and I am so smart, and nerds. And it's white supremacy. Like, white on white action, I guess. The otter versus the bear. I don't know. It's just, so that's the gist, and frankly, I don't really want to watch the rest of this, and I'm not going to because it would take 5 million years to get through. This video is the highly anticipated Daniel Pekic podcast. Like, again, they're riling this up. This is a form of showmanship. It's just kayfabe. You know, they might seem like enemies, but behind the scenes, they're friends. And then, oh, yeah, not once did he critique him for being fascist. Not once did he mention capitalism. Not once did he say the word homophobia or anything like that. He just kind of is this smarmy guy who's like, actually, the world's fine just the way it is. No, it's not. Solomon Nelson. I'm not actually that surprised at all, but you suck. You're no better than Mike Israetel. Wow. Just because you're not on drugs doesn't mean you can't be a dickhead. Okay, anyways, so that's that. That's my response to Solomon Nelson as someone who's basically a white moderate debating a Nazi. A white moderate's just a Nazi with a mask. They are both apologizing for capital. They can't see outside of what concerns them directly, which is to say what they consume, what their profession is, making content. And the same kind of thing with Ozzy Man Reviews, except he's largely talking about his car and sort of distancing himself from Nazis. And he can't even say the N-word. You know, he can't even say fascism. And, you know, so, I don't know. It's really weird watching white moderates. They're like, it's like saying knee to old ladies, or it. The nights who say knee, they can't say the word it. And, I don't know. It's just like, I needed something to talk about for 2 hours. So it's been about 2 hours. So I'm going to end the video here. There wasn't really much of a point. This is just me relaxing because I needed something stress relieving to talk about, and calling out Nazis and white supremacists wearing masks to try and whitewash the whole thing through white moderacy is therapeutic to me. I love exposing this kind of stuff. And I don't know, it's like I like physical fitness and stuff like that. And I like some of the stuff that Ozzy Man Reviews talks about. But the way that these guys, they act like there's a monopoly on this kind of shit. They only talk about themselves. They don't critique anything. There's all these problems in the world. And all they care about is making money and not doing activism by debating their enemies and convincing themselves that they're better than they actually are and that the world around them is in a better state than it actually is. It's not. We're in dire straits right now, guys. You need to seriously pull your heads out of your asses, in my opinion, as someone who, I don't know, writes about this stuff academically all the time. Just what I think, but what do I know? In any event, that's the video. This is just to let off steam. I don't plan on doing this all the time. I'm in the middle of crunch because I'm trying to finish a book, and I have a couple of weeks to do it, and I'm just barely going to make my deadline. And all that being said, this is just for fun. If you like the video, if you want to weigh in on it, I can't imagine that Solomon Nelson will have anything to say in response, or Ozzy Man Reviews for that matter, but it's just something I wanted to say just because. This isn't for money, this is just me saying, calling a spade, being like, you know what, you're a white moderate, you're a Nazi, because that's what they are. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll probably do a Metroidvania video in my series after this, but it's probably going to be after Valentine's Day when I finish my book. But until then, just look after each other, survive, solidarize, speak out against fascism. Don't make content like this. Make stuff that's actually going to help people and protect them from the state, which is in decay right now. But also raise environmental awareness issues regarding post-colonialism and various other things that I didn't have time to address here. It's all important. But don't do content like this that doesn't really say a lot about anything that matters right now. Like, obviously, if you want to talk about things that are important and you want to let off some steam, but this is what this guy talks about all the time. And he manages to weave a bunch of white supremacist stuff into it. And the same idea with Ozzy Man Reviews, where, it's supposed to be lighthearted, ha ha ha, it's a joke. But that's how Nazis get you. And next thing you know, 4 or 5 years from now, they could be making very different videos depending on how things go. But in any event, that's for another day, I guess. And until next time, take care.